So first I'm going to be talking about why defining the very nature of creativity is problematic and just a bit difficult, because if you think about it, it's such a subjective word about what creativity is and what it's around. Steve Jobs once said creativity is just connecting things. When he asked people how they did something, they feel a bit guilty because they didn't really do it, they just saw something. It seemed obvious to them after a while. That's because they were able to connect the experiences they've had and synthesize new things. I'm not saying that Steve Jobs is wrong, but he's kind of wrong, but he's also kind of right at the same time, so it's kind of confusing. But the nature of creativity, or just like the fundamentals of creativity, changes and transforms well beyond its definition, but into industries, people, communities. There's kind of like sub definitions of creativity in different creative industries. It's also interesting to look at creativity historically, because for the most part we only consider people creative geniuses once they're dead, because when they're alive they're usually considered different. For example, if you just thought of one big artist in your head right now from wherever, I can almost guarantee you that when they were alive, they were probably poor, and then some man found their work after they passed, and hey, they made a lot of money out of their art instead of them. And going back to what Steve Jobs said, what does connecting the dots even mean? I sure don't know. Does that mean you can remember things? Does that mean those who are deemed uncreative are unable to remember things? But when talking about this, I feel that perhaps we are maybe overcomplicating a very simple concept that's meant to be creativity. Like, is creativity just being imaginative, or being able to make new things, or just being able to use a cultural skill? I don't know, but that's why it makes this part of the video kind of difficult to discuss, because there's so many options of the route I could take. Before I made this video, when I was writing down things I could talk about in this section of the video, so defining creativity, I was trying to be super smart and ahead of the module lecturers and come up with some way of defining creativity in its most simple form, but I couldn't. There was always a question about what does that actually mean, or is that subjective? So I kind of proved my point that I found it so difficult to define it, and then when I did define it, there would be another question like, what about that? So it does make sense that this section of the video is super difficult and hypothetical to talk about. And in a world now where social media is in complete control, or Web 2.0 as Dave Gauntlet might say, creativity has got even tougher to define. Like, I was researching for this, and it said in one journal that to be creative, it has to be shareable and interactive. Well, some creative practices aren't shareable or interactive. Some people do it for themselves. So I had issue with this journal, and that journal might have issue with my definitions of creativity. That's why it's so difficult to talk about. Secondly, I want to talk about enabling your creativity, or how to hone in on it or make it even stronger or whatever. Enabling your creativity is actually an interesting thing to talk about, because I think that if you want to enable your creativity, that you have to identify yourself as a creative. I identify myself as a creative, and theoretically, and in my head, just in my head, this should be a positive thing. I say this because it would make sense to think that someone who does not think of themselves as a creative person, for whatever reason, surely this would hinder their ability to enable their creativity to some potential. It could only be a bad thing. I'm not trying to make some psychological exploration of identity video about labelling creativity, but merely getting back to the point of what I think enables someone to be creative. So, let's take Lady Gaga, some who may think is the most culturally significant and creative woman in pop culture right now, who spans many fields of creative industries, from music, art, theatre, fashion, it's technology, it goes on. But there's much more to what she puts out to the public. She must have a creative process, of course, as we all have. And before there was a creative process, she must have had influences and external decisions that happened in her life to make her more of a creative person. So when doing my research about her, I found out that her parents got her piano lessons when she was 4 years old, and that she idolises Grace Jones and David Bowie and a variety of other creative powerhouses. And in my head, she wouldn't be Lady Gaga if she didn't have all those other creative people surrounding her. Just like me, Lady Gaga went to art school that where she was able to meet a variety of people, from avant-garde club kids and theatre school, music producers, and in my mind, these are the things that happened that allowed Lady Gaga to, per se, enable her creativity. So from that example, I guess I'm trying to say that being around creative communities and identifying yourself as one of them or a part will help the creativity flourish. So going back to identifying myself as a creative, as a journalist, as a designer for magazines, I believe studying with a variety of creative people on my Westminster campus has helped me to enable my creativity too. Gaga's been a bit more successful than me, but there's still time for me to get a bit more money. And finally, I'm going to talk about creativity and social change, which to me is the most important part about this video, because it spans much more further than me or another creative person. It affects the world. So in this part of the video, I'm just going to talk about 3 major examples which really strike a chord in my mind about having really massive social change power whilst remaining extremely creative in its methodology. I don't mean there's a day that goes by where I don't see my generation using their creativity and the platform of social media for social change. In the past week, from the top of my head, I have seen a time-lapse video of a painter painting onto her body, with literally painting onto her body, a smaller waist to raise awareness for body issues and appearance expectations. That's pretty cool, and it's been shared nearly 1 million times on Facebook. Secondly, Kesha gave an empowering and emotional speech at a human rights campaign in Nashville a couple weekends ago, after being awarded with the Visibility Award for her work with LGBT youth. The singer took to the podium for a special 10-minute talk and opened up about her misfit childhood, her recent legal troubles. She shared it on Facebook and Twitter. Similarly to the last video I spoke about, it was met with a massive sharing and views. And the third video I'm going to talk about is one we probably all know much more about. It's probably the most culturally significant social activist creative video I've probably ever seen. So Beyonce released a music video a couple months ago now, so around the time of the Super Bowl, for her new song Formation. It was completely unexpected. There was no promotion for it. The video is complete social activism disguised or camouflaged as pop music. The actual music video features references to black trans women's rights, Hurricane Katrina's response from the government, antebellum, police brutality and racism, so all quite current and relevant social issues for America right now. The video begins with Beyonce laying on the top of a police car in a flooded street, and it later cuts to a man holding a newspaper with Martin Luther King Jr.'s face on it with the title The Truth. And later on in the video, towards the end of the video, a young hooded boy dances in front of a line of police officers with their hands up before the video cuts to a graffitied wall with the words "Stop Shooting Us" tagged to it. But of course I just use very celebrity orientated social activist creative projects in this part of the video, but activism spans way beyond popularity, but the ability to fully nosedive your creativity into it rather than how many followers you may have. In my opinion, if your social activist creative project is half-hearted, it's obvious and usually unsuccessful, or if not, it deserves to be. Just think about the trend I think about right now is in pop music. There seems to be a trend about writing songs about loving yourself and confidence, but the tracks that don't do too well on the charts are the ones you can usually see right through into the producer's calculating eyes, that it's kind of just calculated that, oh, this is the trend right now, you should sing about this. To summarise my video into pretty much 3 very easy sentences is that, number 1, don't define creativity, it's too hard. you'll hurt your head like I did trying to define it. So, secondly, my second conclusion, without sounding like a motivational speaker, is that if you want to enable your creativity, that you have to identify yourself as creative and believe that you are creative as an individual before you become it. And finally, my final conclusion is that creativity and social activism have always gone hand in hand. It's just that now, in a world dominated by technology, is that we are much more accessible to be reached by social activists. So it's become a stronger tool, and creativity is often dominated by that now. Thank you for watching.